Good evening. Calling our Charter Review Public Workshop to order at 5 p.m. Just want to sort of lay out an outline for tonight of what we'll be doing and the order in which we'll be doing that. So we'll be discussing the 8 referendum questions that were given to us by our Charter Review Committee. We have some of those committee members here tonight, so thank you all for being in attendance. And so I'll go through question by question. We'll take moments to discuss each question, then we will allow for some public commentary regarding those questions, and then we'll move on to the next question. Of course, tonight we will not be voting on this. That will come in the new year when we vote on this and give the final questions to our attorney for the ballots in regards to the referendums that we want to make to the charter. Our committee is here, so if we have specific questions about maybe sort of the background as to why certain things were done the way they were done, they may be able to answer some of those questions for us. But we also have our city attorney here, who was very instrumental in sort of comprising this and putting this together in a way that it could be presented to us, and so we can defer to him as well for some background and some clarity on some of those things. So let's get started. Referendum question number 1 is mandating periodic charter review, and so with that, I think we're supposed to have a PowerPoint for this. Yes, so that everybody can see in the audience where we are with our questions as well. So basically, shall the city's charter be reviewed every 5 years by a committee appointed by the city commission? As commissioners, what are your thoughts on referendum question number 1, mandating periodic charter review every 5 years?
Well, as far as myself, I don't see any issue with that. If the people want to have the charter reviewed every so many years, I don't see anything controversial with that. I think it's good oversight, so I have no problem with it.
All right. You have any thoughts on that, Pat? All right.
No, I think it's good. I think because it's been a long time since we've done this, that as it gets more, as they do this more often, then maybe later down the line it doesn't have to be done as often, but I think 5 years actually is a good number.
Okay. All right. Are there any, Commissioner Tender, she's on remotely with us?
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Okay. Well, she'll be in with us remotely. All right. Any comments from the public regarding question number 1, reviewing every 5 years? All right. Referendum question number 2, regarding adding term limits. We've sort of discussed this, and we've been introduced to this when the chairman gave us the report. So I'm not going to read in detail every referendum question, but just sort of highlight some things from that. So we see that this gives us and currently this is not in our charter, so currently we do not have term limits in our current charter, and so this would provide some guidelines on the term limits, the extensiveness of those term limits. So are there any questions or comments regarding this one? Any thoughts on it?
The only thought I have, Mayor, is, and I'm not opposed to term limits, especially if we could do it for DC, I'd vote yes in a heartbeat. But the only thing that concerns me is a city of our size, with it being a relatively smaller population size, do we run out of pool of candidates that are good to run the city? And that wouldn't be an immediate effect. I'm thinking even 20, 25 years down the road. And of course, the other side of that argument is, well, there'll be population growth over the next 20, 25 years. And I understand that too. But it's just, since we're here doing the workshop, I'm just laying it out there. It's in the back of my mind. If 20 years from now you've exhausted your pool of good candidates and you just start, having people that are not qualified to be in an office, in my opinion, running the city. But I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, I agree. Because next thing you know, I think it happens quite often normally that people run opposed already, if I'm not mistaken. I think the last time was kind of an anomaly. We had like a total of 10 people running. But I do agree that it needs to be a question on the ballot so that let the residents decide, Not a fan of it, but I think it's important for the residents to vote on it.
I have talked to some residents about it, and some of them stated that for them, they define term limits as when you're voted out, your term is up, you know. So if people aren't, if the public is not content with your service, then they vote you out, and that's your, you know, that's basically your term. And I guess sometimes my concerns with term limits are just, you know, if there's a good momentum going, and then a limit is, you know, and then your term comes to an end, how does that momentum continue to flow, and how does it continue to grow? Now, the downside to that is that if there's no term limits and we don't have any momentum, we're not moving in the right direction, and you continue to go down that bad path. So that's, you know, the downside to not having term limits if you don't have the right people in office, which you just vote them out, you know, if the right people aren't in there. So, but that's some of the feedback that I've received on it.
And I understand that argument too. It's just, it's how much water does it hold when only 10 to 15% of the registered voters vote? That always baffles me, because to me this is more important, one of the most important elections than the state and federal level, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I wish we could get a lot more people out there to vote. And then what you're saying, I think, would hold a lot more water to it, where it's like, hey, we don't like them, get them out, or we like this person better, or whatever.
Yeah. You have any thoughts, Commissioner Prano?
Same as Commissioner Warwick. I think we should let people decide. And Commissioner Aldridge's point is well taken too, that we're a small town, but we're a growing town. I mean, if this is what the committee thinks and our people want to vote on, put it out there.
Yeah.
So.
All right, any comments from the public? Yes, sir.
Do the same rules apply about stating your address and everything for workshops? Mm-hmm. Okay. Ryan Scray, 1702 Missouri. I had held last year, I'd held some kind of impromptu sessions with some community members on the same topic prior to when you started the committee, which thank you for starting it. One of the things we talked about was the same things you guys are talking about now. And one of the ideas that the group had come up with was, rather than limiting the overall terms, saying you can be limited to 2 consecutive terms. So in theory, you know, Pat filed yesterday to run again. So he could run a second term, he could take a 2-year break, and then he could go file for one of the other 2 seats or the mayoral seat. So your unlimited amount of time you could serve, but there would be a 2-year break in there that you would have to have. You couldn't run like 3, 4, 5 terms consecutive for the same seat. Or even just saying like, hey, you can switch and run for other seats because you're vacating your seat. So, sorry.
Song.
That's my thought.
All right.
You know, I was actually thinking along those same lines, Mayor. I was thinking time. I wasn't thinking what he was saying, but it is. I like that option, you know, to where you can't run more than 2 consecutive terms. That if you wanted to come back and run for seat 3 when you were in seat 2 after a break, then you would have that option. Because the time frame I was trying to put together, what is it, 8 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 2 terms? Well, I mean, how do we do that? But if as long as we keep it simple with no consecutive terms, I don't think that's a bad idea.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's something we should entertain.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Commissioner Ward?
My initial thoughts is keep it the way it is, because that's what we kind of had the charter review do. Because if we change it, it kind of makes it look like we're doing it for selfish reasons. You know what I mean? I guess that's kind of my thoughts.
Well, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but you know, I'm the devil's advocate for you, and so and so my thought is that with that logic, then we can just say yes to all of this, and then just turn it over to Kevin, and we don't have to discuss it. We just let him vote on it. And I'm not saying we need to change anything, but if we're not open to say, looking at it open-mindedly to say, okay, hey, maybe we should adapt this or that, based on the feedback that we receive or some of the thoughts that we're discussing, then we can just cut it short and just say yes to everything, and then just vote on it in the new year. So, but that's a good point though, that you've made. Anything on it, Pat?
I just kind of think that what you just said kind of takes care of what you both brought up. If you say it's 2 consecutive terms, but, you know, you're not termed out where you don't have to run again. If there's a barrier or break and you want to run again, you know, it should be your right to do so after you've termed out and broke, you
Yeah.
know.
Okay.
I mean, that happens just about everywhere.
Well, and it's also, you got to think lots of times we think towards the negative. So if there's a bad person in office, you don't want them to stay. But on the flip side of that coin, if there's a good person in office that everyone loves, and then you're forcefully removing them from being able to serve their community, and it could be, you know, Mother Teresa of the community, and we're not letting her run for office because of these rules. So,
Yeah.
you know, just another thought and angle there on that one. You know, I kind of agree with what Commissioner Perna was just saying as well. That way someone's not completely done and knocked out and they can't serve their community anymore forever and perpetually for when they ran for office, like when I did when I was in my 30s. Well, if I want to run when I'm 65 again, you know, I can't do it if I serve 2 terms, even though that's a lifetime apart for me. So,
Yeah.
I think what I struggle with is trying to look at it objectively, you know?
From where you're at, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I understand that.
But we're voting on referendum stuff, so this is what we want to take to referendum,
Yeah.
you know?
Ms. Jerry?
Jerry Parker, Red Place. I love this discussion. We really did not discuss in the committee just someone else going on after a break. I really think that's a good idea. I don't know about you guys. If someone wants to do 2 consecutive terms, take a break, and then come back and be elected again, because there's a double-edged sword to that, like you said, Brandon, as well. Other people have mentioned it too. You might have somebody really good in, you might have somebody really bad in. So if we eliminate all the good people and vote out the bad people, and our pool is not been that good lately, so that might be something to consider.
Georgetown, 1603 Rhode Island Avenue. I was the chairperson for the committee. The discussion we had was to come up with term limits because we didn't like the complacency of the government nationwide. It wasn't just Bay County, it's just Lynn Haven. It's all of the government. So what we come up with was they can do 2 4-year terms, which is 8 years, as commissioner. He's an outstanding commissioner, so next time he want to run for mayor, then he can run for mayor for 8 years, and then he's out. That's 16 years in the government. Anyone doing more than 16 years in the government is not doing the rest of the citizens any good. We might have a man with a PhD at Tindley Air Force Base was a leader of 1,000 soldiers. They can do the job just as well as you can. But we don't know that because we keep the same people in office. They give no other person to have an opportunity to come up and show their skills. And that's why we came up with the plan of doing 4 years, your term as a commissioner. You do your term, then you get reelected and do your term second term. After that, you can go for mayor or you can go for something else. But that was what it was. We were trying to get away from complacency in the government.
And I think we all feel that frustration, Frank. I mean, every one of us, I think, at this table and in this room, if you look at the dysfunction of the federal government especially, you see some of it in Tallahassee as well. Term limits at face value sound great. At the local municipal level, though, I think that's where we're having a hard time on whether or not to let somebody never serve again. And I mean, that's pretty strict. I mean, it really is, in my opinion. And again, I understand the intention behind it. I'm not throwing a rock at you. At face value, I agree with you 100%. Term limits are probably a good thing overall, but it depends on whether you're talking local or federal or state. But that's just my 2 cents.
This one did go back and forth, even back to the committee. I think we had original language was just 8 years as a commissioner, 8 years as mayor, and then I think it was the committee before we came in May. We had consecutive in there, and there was discussion, and we took consecutive. So the discussion was, is it lifetime or is it just 8 consecutive? Then you can, like I said, take a break and come back. And so there was certainly, it bounced back and forth. So it's not like, yeah, it went both ways.
Commissioner
Mayor,
Parnell?
if I may ask City Attorney, what other municipalities, that?
Panama City Beach has term limits. I can't think of anybody. anybody else that has term. I know the beach has term limits.
Can you recall what their limits are at the beach?
I don't.
Okay.
I think it's 8 years though, because and I don't know if it's, and it may be lifetime, because I think it's, oh, that person's termed out and they're done.
Got it.
That surprised me because they got a population size less than us.
They do.
Half our size.
Yeah.
Texacola.
That's the only one I can think of that has term limits
Yeah,
around here.
Panama City doesn't. Callaway doesn't.
Mr. Scray?
2 4-year terms are on the city website.
2 4-year terms?
For the beach?
And then you're termed out?
Yeah. Panama City Beach.
Says elected officials are limited to 2 4-year terms.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's lifetime.
Wow.
All right. So we do have some things to think about on that one, whether or not we want to keep it as is or make it 2 consecutive
Yeah,
terms.
it's either keep it as is or put consecutive back in there.
Yeah. So you want to leave it as is?
Why are you looking at me?
Because I'm waiting on your response, man. I'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Aldridge.
You know, if I had to vote on it, I would put consecutive in there, to where you can only serve 2 terms consecutively, and then you must take a break. And then if you do have, like
Unless
you
you
said,
go for mayor, then you can keep
unless
it.
they go for mayor, correct? Then you can run for that for 4 2-year terms. But lost my train of thought. Thanks, Kevin. Anyway, I would put consecutive back in there if it was me. I don't. And again, a part of it, you know, like I said a minute ago, somebody that's younger that's running, and then they get to be older, and they want to serve again, and it's been a 40-year gap between when they served,
Yeah.
and then they can't. And I don't care for that too much. That kind of bothers me.
Got it.
Huh?
George Gaynor. Yeah.
George.
Commissioner Perno.
I agree that we should do the consecutive terms and not close the door completely on someone.
Commissioner Ward.
I like the idea. Again, it's hard to look at it objectively because I don't know how long I would enjoy to do this, you know, because I enjoy volunteering for stuff and trying to make things better. And
We have committees.
yeah, no, that's true. Absolutely. How long of a gap do you guys think would be a good gap? 4 years or?
Commissioner Aldridge mentioned, I think Scray and then Commissioner Aldridge mentioned the 2-year gap where, because basically we're staggered in 2 years. So it's 2 years and the next 2 years and the next 2 years. So once you do your 2 consecutive terms, then you wait 2 years and then you can run again.
Okay.
So, all right, we're gonna make a notation of that for the, to reinserting the consecutive in there for
That
the,
also kind of opens it up to what, like the gentleman was saying a minute ago about what if we have, or I think you said it, what if we have somebody that's been in the military and able, you know, they're the best leader in the city, they would be able to run for that person's seat after 2 terms. I mean, they would have that opportunity to fill that seat. So, and then that person, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but that person, like if they ran for seat 2 and they won for 2 years, and then, or 2 terms, and then they had to get out, they couldn't run for seat 2 again, right? They would have to run for a different seat, or could they run for any seat again?
I think if you wait the 2 years.
You're
your
free to
seat-
run for anything again.
Well,
right?
your seat isn't gonna come back up for another 4 years.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You're
So
right.
you will have to
That
run
takes care of-
for
that's right.
one of the other seats.
Yeah, so
but
they'd have to
I-
wait 4 years if they wanted to run
Yeah.
for their
I
seat.
think that
Right.
in the traditional sense, it'll be a 4-year gap.
Gotcha, gotcha. Right.
Right, it'll be minimal, but.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that, you know, if you're in seat 1, because you 2 guys are together, so then you termed out, then you could run for seat 3.
in 2 years.
In 2 years, you can run for
Or
seat
wait
3.
for my seat again. in 4.
Right.
Four,
In 4.
that's right.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
It's comfortable, right? So
It feels good, I broke in.
come to the podium, please. Thank you.
Something I just thought about while you guys were talking. If there's any kind of special elections or out-of-cycle elections, how would that factor in?
It doesn't include any partial terms. So if somebody
Yeah.
got in a year early or whatever.
So if he were to,
that's-
if Brandon were to vacate his seat, planning on running for Jamie's seat, and then at the year in between the year mark, there's a special election for his seat again,
No, it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, it says not inclusive of any partial term. So if there's
Yeah.
any sort of partial term or vacation or
Yeah,
whatever.
so it has to be the 2-year minimum. Got it.
Right, 2 full 4-year terms. Okay.
Okay.
So add
Thank
the
you.
second packet.
All right, thank you all. Question number 3 is regarding fixing compensation for the mayor and the commissioners. Kevin, if you could speak to this for us, please.
Right, this one, as you know, we've got kind of a funny provision in the charter that there's kind of a funny provision in the charter that your compensation is set by ordinance that then has to be approved by referendum. And so, and it's old and it's outdated and it really hasn't been done. And so what we'd like to do is bring this current to what the practice has been for the last 30, 40 years. And by having it done in this referendum, it'll be approved and set in stone, so to speak. So it'll be in the charter. So I think we took basically what everybody's getting now and then just added, subject to cost of living increases. And so I mean the way it's written is, in lieu of doing an ordinance approved by referendum, let's just set it at the the 1,500 and the 1,250 plus the cost of living increases. And again, if you're doing a 5-year charter review, that may be, if things get out of whack, I mean, that may be something that comes up every 5 years and say, look, the cost of living's not keeping up. We need to adjust it, whatever. But I think this one's important just because of how antiquated the existing charter language is, that this one hopefully passes and needs to get fixed. Whatever you do, you can fix it at $100. I don't care, but
Yeah.
it needs to be fixed.
Commissioner Perno, any thoughts on this one?
Exactly what the city attorney said, that was the most important one to get on the ballot last time, so.
Got it. Commissioner Aldridge?
Yeah, I don't really have a problem with this one. I mean, this is a service job. None of us, I don't believe, up here doing it for the money.
I think the last increase wasn't done that way, so.
Right.
So it doesn't bother, and I agree with what the attorney said. If there's really an issue in 25 years where it's lopsided and crazy and cost of living so bad that it's basically like making $120 instead of $1,250, they can do a 5-year charter review and fix it, so.
Yeah, I agree, because if we don't, then it gets to the point where it gets too low and maybe nobody wants to run for office. And then it's hard to get it passed, say, hey, we want to increase it by this much, where if we do this, it's kind of, I don't want to say set in stone, but close to being set in stone so that you don't ever run into that problem where it's too low and you can't get it increased.
Okay.
And it still has the cost of living increases. That'll still go into effect,
Yep.
so.
Any comments from the public? All right. Question number 4, requiring background checks for the city manager and all department heads. This is saying that the city should require level 2 background screenings. From talking with the city manager, this is something that we're already doing.
Yeah.
And it's really just adding this into the charter to make it standard. And Kevin, if you could just, I guess, describe for us what a level 2 background is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the one where you go get the fingerprinting. So if anybody's had to go do work at a school district or whatever, it's the NCIS, the national database, and the state. You get level 2 is basically the fingerprinted background check. So
You have to do fingerprints for field trips now, man. Be a chaperone.
My thought on this is to save the taxpayer money on putting this on referendum and do it by ordinance and make it concrete part of our human resources, so that way we don't have to, that's one less vote you got to put in front of the people. It's going to be confusing enough. And if it's standard practice now, why go through those unnecessary motions to put it in front of the people when we know it's what everybody wants? So just do it by ordinance, vote at a meeting on an agenda item, and
yeah, I mean,
do
you
it
could certainly
that way.
do it by ordinance. Of course, the ordinance can then just get amended by another commission. So I mean, this one really, like I said, it's in the charter. It makes it a whole lot harder to change. So if it's something that you think is good for the city,
yeah,
put it in the charter. If it's an ordinance, like again, that
you can do it by ordinance and it stands until it's changed
until it's
again.
changed again, right.
But
No, that's a good idea. What are your,
I think we're going to be putting so many questions. If we can get one away from them, you know?
No, yeah, that's a good point. Your thoughts on it being an ordinance?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, you know, I don't think it's a bad idea at all.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we just need to make sure we keep it standard practice. I mean, I know we already were, which is good. But, yeah.
So, yes. Not yet. Is Jennifer?
Yes, she's here.
She's
Jennifer?
here.
Yes.
Question, please. I know we're working on like employee manual, employee handbook, and us making this an ordinance and making it standard practice. Is this something? How would we do this in relation to what you're doing with the employee handbook? Would it just be inserted in there? And what if someone changes this in the future, the ordinance? Would it still? How do we ensure that it remains a standard practice?
My recommendation is you can look at it as a personnel policy. Of course, understanding that that puts the authority with the city manager. But those policies are brought forward to the commission to review and approve. Backgrounds are a moving target in terms of levels. So I hate to say one level and then there's different security levels that may be warranted for different, even department heads. It's up to the commission. If it's here, it's a little more staid. Changing it may be difficult. We do level 2s on, for example, coaches and volunteers because they deal with children. So we do lots of level 2s for the city. It is an additional expense, but it's one that I think you can't ignore or go the less expensive route because the potential risk is too great. I think when you're looking at your department heads and your leaders, it's important because there's a fiduciary responsibility. I can certainly insert it in a policy. You can insert it in an ordinance, which is a level higher. However you all want to do it.
Okay.
We try to stay on the cutting edge to make sure we're doing what we need to do.
Got it. Any additional questions for her? Thank you.
Okay.
Public comments? Ladies first.
Linda Mishler, Hidden Valley Court. I just wanted to let everybody, let you know that the committee was very aware of the fact that that's a standard practice right now, that is being done. We were also aware that that could be done as a resolution also, but unanimously we believed that that should be a part of the charter and that it should be in the charter, and if it's going to come out, it needs to come out the same way it gets in with the citizens voting on it. So,
Okay.
from the committee.
Thank you. Corey.
Good evening, Corey Langford, 1112 Louisiana. I don't know really where this came from or whatever. I see a problem with it. I think the implementation of it, though, number one, how much does it cost to do all of these things? And number two, what this does, this is just requiring that it be done. Then what happens with that information? Is that a disqualifying factor now for the hiring manager? Or let's just say that some individual made a mistake when they were 19 years old, went and served, I don't know, 30 days in jail or whatever, and now they're 50-something years old, and they want to become a department head for whatever department. Does someone not hire them because of that? I'm just kind of, I'm trying to figure out, as a hiring manager, how do you disqualify or qualify someone based off this? All this does is just says that the background check has to be done. And then the final question is that, okay, well, do the citizens have access to that information then? Because if the citizens want this to occur and are essentially requiring this, then is that open information to the entire city for a department head that was being hired to have access to that info? I don't know, there's just a lot of questions as far as the implementation of this. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, I just don't understand where what the outcome is, I guess.
Got it. Could the charter review speak to that a little bit, I guess, sort of on the reasoning behind it?
Georgetown, 1603 Rhode Island. The concept came from previous administrations ran into problems legally. They had a so-called policy that certain things weren't supposed to be done, but the policy wasn't adhered to. And if you make it an ordinance, that still don't mean it's going to be adhered to, but if you put it into the charter, it's in stone. And for the person that does something when they're 19 years old and then they try to be a supervisor when they're 45 years old, some crimes clears themselves over time. Some crimes stay with you forever, such as if you was to rape someone or kill someone, certain types of drugs that you use, they stay with you forever. Some of them would disappear when you turn 40 or 35 or whatever the limits are. And that's the reason why we did this, is to put it in the stone so the charter will have some bite. We didn't want to just make a bunch of ordinances that could be changed with the next city commission to come in. Or well, let's change that ordinance we made last year. Well, let's change the ordinance we made 3 years ago. We put it into the charter, it's there. And that's why we wanted to put it in the charter. And we talked to all of us talked to citizens just like y'all do before we did this, while we were doing this 11 months that we were doing this. And that's the concept we came up with that we thought was best. And that's why we put it in there. Thank you.
And just to interject there are disqualifying offenses, like in the actual charter language, and it's that little blurb at the end. So, convictions, not acceptable for employment are going to be, violent crime, drug, sex offenses. So there are a list of disqualifying offenses, so that's covered in there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Frank Hall, Thurso Road. And thank you to the Charter Review Committee for all your work that you did. But just looking at this question, this is the first time I've seen it. This is more, there's 2 points. One, I agree with Pat. As a voter going in there, it needs to be very, very high level. Number 2, even if you have it in, Mr. Hines was talking about from you want it in stone, policy should be stone enough, ordinance should be even thicker enough. If somebody's not going to abide by a policy, if it's in the ordinance, if it's in the charter, it's not going to be done, okay? I just think that it handcuffs, and I agree with your HR director, that you need to have strong policies that is voted on by the commission, and it needs to be adhered to. Yes, it can be changed, but it has to be coming in front of the people for a change. The city manager can't change it. The commissioners have to change it. So if there's something that you're looking to eliminate, and again, just talking high level, this needs to probably be at an ordinance level or policy level. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mrs. Gray?
You answered my question about the list.
Okay. Any additional public comments? All right. Referring to question number 5, providing a penalty for unexcused absences by members of the city commission. I guess one of the things for us to, to determine is what really is an unexcused absence.
What was the question again?
What is an unexcused absence? So this is providing a penalty for unexcused absences. So basically, if you have 3 consecutive unexcused absences at commission meetings, then you can be dismissed from your position as commissioner, mayor. And so the question is, what is an unexcused absence?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Doesn't the commission move on an absence
correct.
every
Yeah,
time?
and that's what I'm saying. Traditionally, it's really if you just don't call, don't show up, don't give anybody a heads up, you just disappear. Otherwise, if somebody calls Vicky and says, "Look, I'm not going to be here," she'll let you guys know, and then the remaining commissioners can say, "Hey, I'm going to vote to excuse Commissioner so and so today," and then you're good. So I mean, there's no hard and fast rules on. Well, why aren't you here? I mean, you can.
I remember this happening.
But you just need to be excused by the remaining commissioners.
Yeah. Before I was on this board, I remember this happening where a commissioner literally just quit coming to the meetings. And he didn't call and he didn't email. He just literally was like, "I'm going home." And so he had a vacant seat for an extended period of time where there was not a vote cast. And so I do think that I kind of like this because you can't just, in my opinion, when you take this position, just say, "Well, you know what, forget everybody, forget everything." No, you signed up, you're obligated to do your job, and if you're not gonna do it, then get out of the way and let somebody that will, I didn't care for those actions at all.
Got it. Any other comments?
No, I agree.
All right. Mr. Perno?
If you want to put it before, if, if this has to go in front of the people, so be it. But are we stating what shall, it says vacate the office,
Yeah, that's the penalty.
okay?
Yeah, so,
And, but will it still be voted on each, will it still be business as usual? Like, go back to the original, what constitutes an absence?
got it.
So it would be moved, it'll have to be moved on by the commission at each meeting for
And
3
this is
consecutive
this is
meetings.
already
It's already
in ordinance.
Yeah, it's already,
It's already an ordinance.
yeah, they're just moving it to the charter.
Right.
Yeah, so it is already in the ordinance that if we miss so many meetings, then we can be dismissed from office.
So you guys should be, if somebody just doesn't, is absent, you guys should vote to excuse that person or not.
Right, because
I
I
think
know
we
like, when Ms. Tender, I don't remember, it was a couple meetings ago, and she wasn't here, and I didn't realize she was on the phone. So I leaned over at the beginning to the mayor and I said, hey, I think we have to take a vote on that, and which it is. That's what constitutes, I guess, an unexcused absence versus an excused absence. Because all it simply takes is someone saying I'm sick or I'm out of town and the rest of the board members are going to excuse them. So this is for people that are flagrantly just, saying forget everything, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah, when we're left with no recourse.
Right. We're left with an empty seat.
Yeah.
So.
Got it. Any comments from the public? Okay. All right, question number 6, approving charter updates assigning duties in the absence of the mayor or city manager. Any concerns about this one?
And this is when we talked about maybe breaking it up into 2 different questions. So I'm not sure which direction you want, because it was a little wordy, I guess, but it's, because you are talking about 2 different things. One, absence of the mayor, and one, absence of the city manager. So I know we had a brief discussion. I looked back at the minutes. We didn't really definitively decide it. We're not deciding anything today even, but this is one we may want to break up into 2. One to deal with the mayor, one to deal with the city manager.
Got it. So now, say for example, like with, if we don't, with the city manager aspect of it, if we don't put that in ordinance, then who appoints that? Wouldn't we still appoint that though?
The city the city commission would appoint, an interim or deputy or whatever.
Any other input?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it needs to be split up. There's a lot of stuff in there, and it is talking about 2 different things. So there might be one thing that you agree with, but another thing that you don't. So how do you vote on that? That's like when we had that constitutional or state amendment about vaping and drilling offshore. It's like, how do I vote on that,
I just want to just throw it out there. We have a revolving mayor pro tem going. Why don't we have a revolving deputy city manager from the department heads for that would, maybe it's just 4 department heads, but it switches. I mean, to me, the less is more when it comes to referendum questions to everybody. If we can, I'm not trying to eliminate it, but if we make 2 questions out of this, then the previous one might be better at the ordinance level.
Yeah.
I think what we want to do is not.
Yeah, and I think for management, that's gonna be. You want the most experience. So basically, Vicky, we'll have a deputy city manager, and so really, it's if that person is gone, then the commission steps in and puts an interim in there. So I don't know if you really want that to be rotated, because you're going to want more your most experienced manager.
No, that's true.
Available.
What is? Is there one right now?
I do exactly what you do, revolving deputy manager when I'm out. I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's fair. That's fair to your court. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So are we thinking of
I just wanted to
striking
throw
the
that out
second-
there as far as what, can you make one question out of that and do the other one the way it's business as usual, or? remove 5 and make 2 questions out of 6, whatever.
Yeah, I think we just take question 6 and we'll break, we'll do 1 to deal with the mayor, mayor pro tem, and 1 to deal with the city manager and deputy city manager.
And I guess the question is with the second part of that, is that really more of a personnel thing? Like we mentioned, even with the previous one regarding the level 2 background, with it being ordinance and personnel policy, would the second part of that really fall more under a personnel issue? And is it something that we can do on the personnel level without it having to be in the charter per se?
Yeah, well, and I think you do anyway, but with the absence of a city manager or a deputy city manager. So then it just clarifies that falls to the city commission to fill that role.
I mean, let's make the assumption that this doesn't pass. What happens?
So the city commission still fills that role.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we still do that, yeah. I mean, and I guess we can look at what happened, what happened previously when we didn't have a city manager. I think it was the city commission that appointed the interim city manager.
Right.
So, but, all right, so that's something for us to consider. Well, like I said, the first part, just really focus on the first part of the question. All right, any comments from the public?
We pay the county for every referendum question that we get on the ballot, or is the county, or are we riding
I
on
think
the
you really,
county on this one?
I think you really just pay for the election. So as long as we
If
do
it's-
it during
if
a
it's in a-
regular election cycle, I
Right,
think
we
so.
don't
I don't
pay for it.
think there's.
Hold on one second. Any comments from the public?
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Thinking not as myself, but as a just common voter who doesn't attend city meetings. I don't get this. I'm gonna vote no because it's just too convoluted. Even if you split it up, like, why do I care about this? Especially if you're already
Less
doing
is
it.
more.
Especially if you guys are already doing it. This is one, some of the other ones where you said, Pat, like maybe we do this as an ordinance. I disagree. I'd like it in the charter, but this one, just do an ordinance and take this off the ballot, please.
This isn't something that I'll vote on. This is also something that did not come before the charter committee. But looking at this whole thing, it just seems to me, I don't understand why a city of this size doesn't have a assistant city manager, and I brought this up before, or a city clerk that's independent of the manager. It just seems like that's checks and balances. That's also help for Ms. Gaynor. And you know what, when we all know what happened, a few years ago, Ms. Gaynor was able to step in. Right now, you really don't have it. I mean, I understand that there's people who step in as needed, but if something like that happened, before that, we had a city manager who passed away, while he was still the city manager. It just seems to me you need somebody that's a second in command, whether it's right under Ms. Gaynor or not. So, but again, I know that's not coming up, but this is something food for thought for in the future if this ever comes up again. If I were voting on this, I would probably vote no because I don't like any of that. But that's just me.
Right. And I think, when we break it up into 2 different questions, it'll be a lot more clear. I mean, the one has to do with the mayor pro tem and rotating it, so that's built in here. So we can break it up in 2. But what we have currently in the charter is during the absence of the city manager, the commission appoints an interim. So that's what's in there right now. What the charter review committee, which this did come from them, was, well, what if Vicky's already appointed a deputy city manager? And so what the charter amendment really says is, in the absence of a deputy city manager, then you guys can come in there and pick. So it really just kind of, still puts it in the manager's hands, say, look, I'm gonna be gone for 6 months or whatever. I've got a deputy city manager. You're good to go. You don't have to do anything. And so the charter amendment would be adding in the assumption that there's already a deputy city manager appointed by her. Otherwise, it goes back to, she might say, look, I've got a deputy city manager. Well, that's not charter. If she's gone, you guys need to come and you can overrule that, pick somebody else. But if you put it in the charter, then you're going to go with whoever her deputy is.
Yeah.
Ms. Rushing, if you would please come to the microphone, please.
Uh-oh. What'd you do?
Yes.
And this is in regards to the previous statement from public. Could you sort of describe for us what your duties are, or what is your position title
I'm
right
the
now?
Executive Administrative Coordinator. So I take care of everything for the city manager. I oversee her calendar, her diary, make sure all the meetings run in sync, everything's smooth and running, all the agenda items, everything is set and ready for the meetings, for the commission. All communications are smooth between the city manager and the commission and the attorney and the vendors and the contracts people and everyone. I's are dotted, T's are crossed, contracts that are expected are followed up for and put before the city manager for signature.
She
And you
also
do the
serves as
minutes.
the deputy clerk as well,
Right.
where she does all the minutes, all the posting, all of that,
Yeah.
which before I became city manager, that is also what I did.
So basically her duties as a city clerk for the most part.
Correct.
She's
That's
the
why I asked her
deputy.
to come
Okay.
up, so we could explain that although that's not the title that we use,
Right.
that's the function that she carries,
Right.
is that of a city clerk. And so when I compared what her job function was, and I looked up city clerks from other municipalities and throughout the state, they were the same job functions.
Right. Yep.
And so what we see that may be a little different is like in a city commission meeting where she's taking minutes for us and city manager is recording the vote or calling the vote. If you go to Panama City, then her city clerk is the one that's up calling the vote, and the city manager is not doing that.
Right.
So that's really one of the differences that I see, but basically she does what all the other clerks do. She communicates with us. She, runs reports for us. She, asks questions for us. And so essentially we do have a city clerk. Now, we don't have an assistant city manager, but I think, thank you. But I think we should allow that to be left up to the city manager as to who's going to work along with her. Because if we go out and we appoint an assistant city manager, and if the chemistry isn't there, then it could really turn out bad for the city. And so that really needs to go back to more of a personnel issue in regards to hiring an assistant city manager. And right now we don't even have the budget for that right now.
I think when we get bigger, that might be something to think about. I just don't think we're there for a city's assistant city manager.
Because I think when you look at cities that do have the assistant city manager, even our local cities, I mean, their budgets are probably 2 or 3 times the size of our budget.
Right.
Not necessarily looking at the size of their city regarding citizens, but the size of their budget is a lot larger than what we have.
And they're breaking out you're going to do this and you're going to do that. There's just a lot more going on,
Yeah.
and I don't think we're there yet for assistant city manager.
I'd like to, this is one point, and I talked to the city manager about this, and I've talked to a few of you about it. When is the right time to have a city clerk?
I think that's what we're saying.
Well, you have, my concern, it goes back to discussions that we all know about the city has lost, we had an embezzlement, and I know there's controls in place.
Right.
But typically a city clerk reports to and is hired or fired by the city commission. There's a separation of duties. And again, this is nothing, I love the city manager to death. This has nothing to do with the position. This has to do with the structure. To me, and I asked the question to the Charter Review Committee, did they look at putting in the charter for a city clerk? And again, I hear that we don't have the budget, but we have somebody already doing the position, and reallocation of dollar. I don't think it's a dollar issue. If you look at the cost of $100,000 and how much we lost, and you divide that out and how many years it would cost to recoup it, I do think this city, if you look from a growth perspective, Lynn Haven's one of the fastest growing cities in Bay County in Northwest Florida.
Right.
It is time that if we're spending a lot of time on this charter review, that we look forward to the future. It has nothing to do with the current commission. It has nothing to do with the current city manager. It's for the future. And I do think that this is something that needs to be looked at, that there's a separation and hired by the city commission. So that's just my thoughts on it. Thank you.
In regards to city clerk, there is a clerk in the charter. The city manager serves as clerk in the charter. There is a treasurer in the charter. The mayor serves as treasurer in the charter. That could have been some of the issues with previous administrations, but we do have a city clerk within the charter. It's city manager dash clerk, and then mayor dash treasurer is how the charter has that reading. And so we do have those positions actually in the charter, but your point is noted. Yeah, so, yes, sir.
As you guys talked about all the duties that CJ does, I pulled up a job posting from Fort Walton Beach that was made in 2020 for city clerk. I have a couple questions on how our city clerk, per se, is this. So you're saying the city clerk is the city manager, or the duties that she's fulfilling?
And technically in the charter, the city clerk is labeled as the city manager.
Okay.
And the city manager can assign those duties to someone to perform those duties.
So since we're about to put to ballot a bunch of ballot measures, now would be a good time for you guys to think about fixing that. Because, for example, when I read through this job posting, it's all the stuff she does. It's not what she does. And I'm not thinking about Vicky. I'm thinking about all the people that could be in that spot. And one of the things on here is it says direct supervisor. Who is her direct supervisor?
City manager.
Okay. On here it says city council. So maybe it's time for the commission to consider, while we're changing these questions and thinking about what's going to get put on this ballot, fixing that part, because all the things she's doing tells me she's a city clerk.
Essentially what happens is the city clerk is accountable and supervised by the city commission. So when you look at, is the clerk being supervised by the commission, that is what's being done, yes.
So in this job posting, it specifically talks about how they work in conjunction with the city manager. They directly report separately to the city council, and the city clerk actually manages the city clerk's budget, which is separate from the city manager. So it is a separation of duties in most other cities.
And I'm not saying it's not a separate, what I'm saying, I'm not saying it's not a separation of duties. You don't have to go to Fort Walton, you can go to Panama City. There's a separation of duties. What I'm saying is that those duties are being performed not by the city manager, because what we hear from the community is that we need a city clerk because the city manager is having to perform all those duties. The city manager has hired someone to perform those clerical duties.
So like a lot of these other referendum questions that we already do it because we have an ordinance, let's make it firm, let's make it in stone, get it fixed, and ask the city, the citizens, hey, we already have a city clerk, she's sitting right over there. Should we make it official by having her to report directly to the commission, having her own separate budget, and working in collective with whoever's the city manager is? Right now, I personally feel we'd have a great relationship between the two of them. Down the road, maybe not. And I worry about whoever replaces Vicky eventually having their own agenda over this person that they hire. What if they say, you know what, I can handle these duties, bye.
Right.
So I would just compel y'all to really think, now is our chance, if we want to ask the citizens, really think about that and maybe making some adjustments and corrections to that.
So I didn't realize that this was the path we're going to go to when we were talking about this question. But I don't know if you guys remember, I think it was about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I brought it up at a pre-commission meeting about the city clerk duties, and encourage y'all to look into it, do some research and see what you found. And I end up calling multiple municipalities, I probably talked about somewhere between 40 and 50 municipalities on the city clerk position. And, it's normally it either falls under the city manager or it falls under the city commission. And when I first started looking at it, it was, the information I would get was kind of conflicting, because I'd talk to some city clerks and they would say, oh, we think it's better if it falls under the city manager. And I would talk to other ones and say, it's better under the city council. But when I started asking them questions, that's the only way they've done it. So they're like, yeah, it works great. But then I finally started finding city clerks that have done both. And those are the ones I thought were more valuable in the feedback and saying, which one do you prefer? And the consensus I got was they would rather fall under the city commission than the city council. And I've actually...
The city manager? You just said city commission than city council. So
I'm sorry. They would rather be under the city commission or council versus the city manager. And I actually ran across a couple of them. I ran across one that actually they changed it because of some things that happened in the city. And I talked to her quite extensively about that. And I actually talked to another one that was from another state that came into Florida that did it totally different. And the reason they like being under this, they think it's better under the city commission or the council is because of the checks and balances that are in place. So again, everything that Mr. Hall said about Vicki Gaynor, I agree with. I don't think it's a problem right now. It's a question of in the future if we had another, rogue city manager. And, if the city is doing something illegal or unethical, is the city clerk going to come and talk to us about it if they fall under the city manager? And the chances are it's pretty slim to none that they will, because in fear of reprisal or losing their job. Where if it falls under the commission, then, then it's more apt that those things will come out and we can do something about that. And I think that's kind of why I was digging into it and starting to look at it, because I think that is a good balance to have the city clerk that falls under the commission versus the city manager. I know we talked about it a little bit, and I know that we don't agree on it, and I probably would feel the same way if I was in her shoes, because it's like, here, you hired me for this job, and now you're going to take the person away from me that you hired me to do. But I think it's important for us to look at it in the future. I think that setup works best if we want to try to keep the city with checks and balances as far as legal and ethical activities.
I think one of my concerns would be having the city clerk under the commission, and it will be in my mind that as the city manager, you can't tell me what to do.
Right.
I mean, that's what will be in my mind. So no matter what you ask me to do, I can do whatever I want to do because you're not my boss. Although we may say I work in your office and you have some sense of oversight, I don't have to do what you're saying because I don't report to you. I report to the commission. And then that one person now has 5 bosses, and the issue becomes if we're not clear and concise in what we're trying to do, now we're misleading, or you're going to call and say, I want this. You're going to call and say, I want this. You're going to call and say, I want this. We do it with the city manager now. Right. And so I think then you're going to have more, it could lead to, from an administrative perspective, a little more chaos within the city, because now you have 2 employees that both of them under the city commission, and then the other one that may feel like they don't need to follow the direction of the city manager because I don't work for you. I work for the city commission. So those are my thoughts on that. We're going to move on to the next question.
I think we're herding cats a little bit.
Yeah.
Even if she was under the city commission, we'd be having her under the directive to work with the city manager, wouldn't we?
Right. We would, but the thing is, if we're hiring her, she doesn't have to do what she says because she can't fire her.
Right.
So I'm just saying,
our order would be to work with her under our directive, is what I'm saying.
But yeah. I mean,
So
she would be a charter officer, but
that's the nature of what you do with a clerk.
Yeah.
She
And
has
I
to
think
work with the city manager.
really where you see the problems in that is when you have, a city clerk who's a charter officer, but they oftentimes, they need people underneath them. But those people underneath the city clerk are actually under the city manager, because the city manager does all the personnel stuff. And so that's where you kind of see some of the tension. It's like, all right, my staff really report to the city manager. They don't report to me as the city clerk. City clerk is sort of a one-off, like the city attorney.
So
they're just a one-off. They report to the city commission, but...
So now we have this snowball effect where...
But I mean, you have to work together, obviously, but
so we have this snowball effect where the city clerk doesn't have to listen to the city manager.
And that, and that may happen sometimes. I've not seen that really be an issue. The issue is the staff underneath the city clerk when you've got a big clerk department, because every charter you see, it's always the city manager who's in charge of the personnel. And so that includes, the people working for the city clerk, they're really my people. That's where you see some of the tension. But
Gotcha.
So from the ones that I talked to, they seem to have had a good relationship with the city manager, which I agree, that's very important, because if they don't, then it could have a snowball effect. But at the same time, if the city clerk falls under us and there's a problem, it's either the city clerk or the city manager, and then it's up to us to figure that out. And if it's whichever one we think it is, then we need to hire another person to make sure we bridge that gap. Vice versa, if they fall under the city manager and we have another problem like we did in the past, then there could be things going on that we don't know about, that we should know about. And I don't think that's going on right now. I don't think that's a now problem, but that could potentially be a future problem. And I think in order to prevent that, this would be a good setup for that.
Well, if the things that happened in the past, if they're based on a person's decision-making and their integrity, then as the city, if I'm the city manager, then I'm going to give the city clerk a piece of the pie, so they're not going to say anything. They're not going to go to you and say anything. But we're going to move on to question number 7. All right, clarifying election procedures and canvass of returns.
Right, and this one, I know we talked about it before, this really just brings the charter up to date with the current practices with elections, and it'll be reported at the next regular commission meeting. I think it used to say like, the following Friday, or it was just kind of bizarre. It didn't really match up with what the practice has been when the election, and with the supervisor elections really handling everything now, it makes sense just to bring it up current to what the current practices are. So it'll be, you'll have the returns at the next regularly scheduled meeting, and then like we've been doing, instead of having to have a special meeting at the very next day, when a lot of times your returns aren't even ready till, Friday at noon. You're waiting on Mark Anderson to get the returns to you. So we always wait till the next meeting anyway. So this just brings it current to what the practices are.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
All right, any comment from the public?
I have one concern, and it has to do with the when somebody's dropped after the qualifying period before the election. Let's look at the upcoming election right now. We have one candidate filed for seat 2. That's Mr. Perno. I like him as a commissioner. I'm going to support him. I'm going to vote for him. If somebody else I don't agree with as commissioner runs against him, and God forbid, hope this ain't real wood, it's got to do, but God forbid something happened to Pat, and he, after the qualifying period, has to drop, why don't we offer a limited opening for a qualifying period for anybody else rather than just giving it to the other person?
I don't think we're the ones that determine the qualifying period.
And we talked about that in the.
So that's not even an option.
Not really. I mean, we talked about, can we extend qualifying, and again, because the city does not handle their own. Used to be no problem because we would handle our own elections. We'd
So
set
this
them.
is like kind of like one of those home rule issues where the state decides for
No, we
us.
could still, if we wanted to, we could handle our own election. Nobody does. We contract it out, and we let the supervisor of elections do it, and it saves a bunch of money.
But you can't
long-term.
tell the county or the state elections office, hey, our charter says this, so you have to honor it?
And that's happened before, and that's where you get into look, if you want to use the supervisor of elections, here's
our
when your
way or no
qualifying
way.
is. Correct.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do that, and you can, by all means, buy your own ballot machines and operate your own elections and spend that money every year.
Right.
And nobody's willing to do it.
So it's like basically...
Get in line or do it yourself.
Yeah, it's like basically offsetting the hypothetical.
Right.
So that sucks, but
Yeah,
okay.
but we talked through that as well.
I appreciate that.
Well, Commissioner Perno's got 1 vote so far, so.
There you go. Good job.
There you go. Additional public comments? All right. And referendum question number 8. This is approving miscellaneous charter updates, basically.
Right, and that was all the
Fixing everything
cleanup,
up.
the typos, the where to fours, here tos, consolidated some sections that overlapped. So this was really just the grammatical, cleanup type of one that'll be shown in the red line
That was
of
all
the charter.
gender bias language.
It was a lot of that, yeah.
We changed it all to non-binary.
All right, so everybody's a yes on that one. All right, any comments from the public on that, number 8? Yes, sir.
So do you know when we're gonna go over this again to see what we want to modify? Is that gonna be the one in December or January?
It'll
or-
be in January because we have to have 2 meetings for it,
Okay.
so it'll be in January.
The first meeting in January and the second, the first meeting in January and second meeting in January.
So my thought was go ahead and take this, put it in ordinance form, based on what we talked about today, and then, you know, obviously, it's got to be done by ordinance, so that's going to be, you know, 2 readings and 2 more meetings.
So
we can either bring it back as an ordinance and go ahead and do the first reading and make changes, or have, if you want to do another workshop on it.
No, we're going to just take it to commission meeting.
Y'all, can I say something?
Yes, sir.
I don't think we should put 8 questions in front of the people. I think if we agree on certain parts of one, like, and then we should have a question where it's bullet points on what we want to add. Boom, not a yes or no. This is what we want to add, and then they could vote yes or no on the bundle, on the stuff that's pretty much agreed on anyway. And that would help combine some of these things to one thing.
And that's what we
I know you're
tried
giving
to-
them the option of yes or no, but it would be a profound yes when you read the bullets. So,
Gotcha.
Which I think is what we tried last time, was we did all or nothing.
Well,
We
I
did a
think
total, and it was a lot of the same.
Well,
There's not a lot changed since the last time it went.
I know,
went
but
to everybody.
eight separate questions is going to be a lot for the voter. I mean, from working with Mark, if we put this in front of Mark Anderson, he'd probably say the same thing. Knock it down to 2 or 3 questions. You know what I mean? If you can. So, I mean, that should be our goal for the next time we talk.
Right.
What and how can we, so that would be my leaving thoughts. So before you round it up with everybody, I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse.
since this is a long time since we've done this is why there's so many, but you're right. Once we do this one, then it should be
We got to
easier.
get to where we modify it down to where, you know, we got to think of everybody who's walking in that voter's booth. They don't want to see a whole page
Right.
dedicated to the Lynn Haven Charter, as endearing as it is to the people that are here right now and what we're doing. It means a lot, and that's important. But
So how many
John
questions?
Q. Public needs to have 2 or 3 things in front of them.
I'm going to say, how many questions do you think we need to max out on then regarding?
2 or 3. You know, you look at.
You're talking about this time or just
You
in the
look at,
future?
You know, you look at your article, when you go to vote, you know, they're small paragraph, one thing, you know what I mean? And you get to 3 amendments, and you're kind of going, you know, when you're in the voter booth, you're okay, you know. It's a lot to capitulate when you're there. You're already nervous enough you're voting, some people are. I know, you know.
If it passes where they're doing it every 5 years, there shouldn't be a whole lot of changes.
That's the one to start with, you know, of course, we know, but the other ones, if we thought about it, just saying, whatever we can do to make it less being more for the public, that's all, that would be my parting thoughts. So.
When do we have to have this voted on to give to?
I think
And I'm
early February.
Early February, okay.
So we have enough meetings to hash it out, or a workshop again, or whatnot, but I just don't know about putting 8 things in front of me.
One of the things we could do is that we could, between us and then, you know, update Commissioner Tender on this, is we could identify 3 or 4 that we want to see on it.
We probably need to keep talking about it at our pre-meetings, you know, dedicate 10 or 15 minutes to it, so we can keep eating the elephant one bite at a time until we get something right in front of people.
Well, I think for our next pre-commission meeting, one of the things we could do is, prior to the pre-commission meeting, is we could send to the city manager the top 3 or 4 that we think should be prioritized for the ballot, and then maybe she can tabulate to see which ones get the most votes from us, and then say, okay, hey, this is what you all have decided on.
I don't want to leave anything off that we talked about.
No, I think
It's
you
just-
can
it's just the
combine
format that we want to put it in front of people.
Right, you can combine, you know, like a 5-year charter review, that's pretty innocuous, and the unexcused absences. I mean, these are things that probably don't need to be, they don't seem controversial at all. They don't need to necessarily be separate voting item. So
Yeah.
it's just we ran, on the last one, we had everything combined and it was all or nothing. So if you do bundle some of these together and you pick the wrong one in that bundle, it could mean they all fail.
Yeah.
So,
Like, for example, question 8, I don't think anybody is opposed to updating the language in the charter. So why can't we, I agree, just do an ordinance on that we're going to clean up the charter language. And then
well, you can't change, I mean, to change the charter, you've got to do the
We have to do a
referendum.
charter
You have to do it.
amendment. We can't
But
just-
with that question 8, which is just this miscellaneous stuff, maybe in that's one ballot question that says, all right, we're going to do a charter review every 5 years. We're going to have the unexcused absences language. We're going to clean up the language. So it's just one question. Are you good with this? Yes or no? So that's one question. Something like term limits probably should be a standalone item.
Yeah.
You know?
I just hear Mark Anderson's voice from being in training sessions with him, from working as a poll worker, that,
The beach does it to them all the time.
keep
They've
it
got
simple,
dozens.
Gotcha. So you're wanting us to combine
Keep it simple.
these into 2 or 3 questions then, as opposed to choosing 2 or 3 questions?
I would, wherever we can, if we're all resounding agreeing on what we want to, hard, fast charter review, change, or implementation, put the bullets there, yes or no. I mean, we don't have to do it individually if we feel firmly on putting bundling versus.
Yeah,
And I don't know how we're gonna do it, because, whether or not they all make sense when you bundle them or not, but we've really gotta work on, we have 8, we know what we want, how do we make it 4? How do we make it 3? Because the voter is going to be overwhelmed when they get to question 5. And you don't want people to be going, no, 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 because they're just, you know what I mean? You want it.
Yeah, and really the only thing new is the term
Just
limits
like-
and the background checks.
Like when
Everything
the
else
judges
is just
come up,
cleaning up the
when
language.
you're voting for judges. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
Commissioner Ward?
I was just going to say, I think this year is going to be kind of an anomaly for that, but I get what you're saying. If we can dwindle it down a little bit, the better, the more the better, I get it. But this year, I think we have to keep in mind this is going to be an anomaly because this is the first time we've done this in a long time.
Yeah, but still, eight's probably too much,
And I think the committee initially had more than that. I think they did work to get it down to the 8 when they initially started.
I think we can get all 8 in there, but somehow,
Yeah, bundle 3 of them into one question.
Yep.
That's fine.
So one question will be like this long.
Bullets.
Yes or no?
Bullets. 2-sentence bullets on 3 things. Vote yes or no.
Right. Yeah, because I mean,
You know what
it's
I mean?
it's simple stuff like
The
unexcused
chart-
absences.
The charting
charter-
review
Right.
resoundingly agrees to do this. Boom, boom, boom. Vote yes or no. And then
You wanna correct grammar.
And then when you need the small paragraph, 2 or 3 other ones.
Right.
But
Smaller ones.
you could just.
I guess, Kevin, if you could work on that for us prior to the next city commission
You
meeting,
can just put that,
and give us an
charter-
example of what that could look
charter
like.
committee work, the commission
Yeah,
work.
I mean, I think what I'll do is go ahead and put the ordinance together, like this with the questions. Then, without having a first reading, we'll come back at a pre-meeting and then say, okay, which one of these makes the most sense to combine?
Yeah, so if we could do that for the December, because we're only meeting once in December, so if we could do that for the December meeting, and then we can have the first reading in January, second
Yeah, and then
reading in January.
in the December one, we can talk about what should we combine.
Yeah. Well, no, if you could go ahead and work on combining that before we get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll call you.
Yeah. Yeah, if you could go ahead and do that and just already have that ready for us so we can look at that and discuss that then, and then it'll be ready for the first reading whenever we start in January. I mean, I'm not trying to make you, work over the holidays or anything like that, but if you could put that together for us. All right. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you all for coming out. Meeting adjourned.
I think we should make it work.